Afternoon, sir. How are you?
Well, very well. Good afternoon. How are you?
You look so different now.
Well, this is thanks to the lockdown, and I thought I would really devote myself to, more scholarly pursuits, and I have to look scholarly as well.
Yeah. You look like one. Yeah.
Thank you. No, we have a few more minutes before we start rolling, and I just want to make sure that apart from Professor Chaturvedi, we do have Professor Ajay Dubey with us by now. Professor Dubey, can you call in if you are there? Shortly, I suppose he'll be with us. We'll have a couple of minutes, but I can see Professor Ajay Dubey. I think he has signed in. Professor Dubey, are you with us? Hello, Professor Dubey. I did see the name flash up.
Yes, sir. He joined, sir.
Yes. Just want to make sure he can hear us, and as and when required, we can hear him as well.
Yes, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. How are you, Professor? Thank you for joining us.
Okay.
I hope you've been keeping well.
Yes.
Good.
Thank you.
Getting used to this new norm of not just meeting one or two friends during the course of a day, but now through webinars, we are interacting with 50, 100 people almost on a daily basis.
Yes, I think more than once every day.
That's right. Did you see that very funny cartoon somebody circulated by WhatsApp? I can send it to you. If you haven't, it shows a skeleton sprawled over the computer, and it says jokingly there in macabre fashion, it says cause of death webinars.
Yes.
But I think it's a learning curve. So because we haven't been doing too many webinars, as you know,
Yes.
I think it's the number of webinars that you typically do is, I think, a function of the infrastructure that you have. So pardon me for saying this, but normally where there is lack of physical infrastructure, there is obviously a greater reliance on technology and a greater proclivity to do more of webinars and such connections. Of course, you can attribute it to greater sophistication also. But finally, we, despite our infrastructure, now we are in the same situation. We can't have people coming here. So we are also going the webinar way now.
The acceptability has increased. With the
That's
same
true.
existing infrastructure, we are doing so many webinars which we can never think of. The legitimacy, acceptability, the credibility, the indispensability, all of them are increasing.
Right. That's true. So it's 2 o'clock now. So ladies and gentlemen, let's roll with a very, warm word of appreciation towards all of you for having joined us this afternoon for a webinar. Good afternoon to each one of you. And today's topic is COVID pandemic and implications for India-Africa relations. We propose to have this for approximately an hour or hour and 15 minutes. If you please, I will make a few introductory remarks simply to set the ball rolling. And thereafter, of course, we will have two very eminent speakers. We will have Professor Ajay Dubey, Chairperson CAS JNU, and Professor Sachin Chaturvedi, DG of the RIS. Both these speakers are well known, but I think I'll be remiss if I did not say a few words about their achievements. Professor Ajay Dubey has leads the Energy Studies program, School of International Studies at JNU, Institute of Advanced Study. and he's published several books on Africa. He's also the editor-in-chief of 3 international peer-reviewed biannual journals and many other things, too numerous for me to list out. Professor Sachin Chaturvedi is extremely well known among all of us. We also get to interact with him since he heads the RIS. And he is also a prolific author, written more than 20 books, contributing chapters to several others. He was the Global Justice Fellow at the Macmillan Center for International Affairs at Yale University. He is part of many other groups aimed at institution building in India. Having said that, let me quickly move to the topic. Now, I do not intend to try and give you a lot of details, but suffice it to say that what I mention is really by way of a list of points of inflection for the 2 speakers to dwell on in their remarks. The first is that COVID is everywhere, and Africa has not been spared. Africa is not inured. It may be a latecomer to this crisis, and since the first case was diagnosed in Egypt in mid-February, the pandemic has spread to almost every African country, barring Comoros and Lesotho, apparently, and one doesn't know for how long they will remain untouched. Compared to the 3 million cases globally, one can cite statistics and say, well, they have only about 33,000 confirmed cases, and therefore this is low. But that's really not addressing the core of the issue. And many experts have said that it is wrong to draw any firm conclusions at this stage. Africa may simply be behind the curve. It already has high rates of other diseases, TB, HIV, malaria, and many other afflictions like diabetes, hypertension, that are, of course, not unknown or novel in India either. Malnourishment is very high in Africa. Bill Gates has also warned that this may end up with the pandemic taking about 10 million lives if you're not careful, with the same sentiment being echoed by WHO. Then there is the question of the reliance of the African economies on, especially those that rely on commodities. And there, of course, Nigeria, Angola, South Africa, all these relatively larger economies that rely on commodities and in particular energy are also likely to be affected as a result of the impact the energy sector has taken in the wake of the crisis, with global economic activity virtually grinding to a halt and countries everywhere having their storage capacities full. The bottom has fallen out of the oil market. And so like Russia, like Iran, and many African countries are also obviously going to find themselves in the dock, in the doldrums. Now, lastly, as far as we are concerned, India and Africa have very close relations. We really wanted to do much more this year. We began earlier this year with the first ever India-Africa Defense Ministers Conclave, as you know, that took place in February on the sidelines of the Defense Expo 2020. And later this year, we intended to host the 4th India-Africa Forum Summit that was to take place. That doesn't happen every year. So it was about time that the next one happened, and we were really waiting for it. But I suppose this has also been put on the back burner. I don't know whether we'll be able to do it this year. We must try and help Africa as much as we can with pharmaceuticals and medical equipment. We must also make sure, as we have seen it happening in the past, that we can't have others selling spurious drugs in Africa with made in India labels. And you know who I'm pointing a finger at right now. The one other country that is currently engaging in considerable, mask diplomacy, although credibility is being dented because of political motives attached, and also because of the quality issues that are associated with their supply of PPE and other stuff. So with this being said, I will now turn to the first speaker, Professor Ajay Dubey. Please speak for about the next 15 minutes. All other mics may kindly be muted. Those that are on may kindly please mute their own mics. Otherwise, we will try and do it for them. We have a chat box here. So from now itself, if you have questions that you come prepared with, or ones which are sparked off by the speakers say, kindly put them into the chat box so that I have some idea. And then I can take stock of the whole thing. We will come to that during the discussion at the end of the remarks made by the two speakers. Professor Ajay Dubey, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ambassador, for inviting me to participate in this. I'm happy that African Studies Association members are also here, and they will benefit from your initiative. As you very rightly said, Africa is also part of this pandemic. But one strength that Africa has, that Africa is used to several pandemics in the past. And that's something that makes things easier and also complex for Africa to handle the corona crisis. The corona crisis came a bit late, as you said, on 15th February. It is still confined to a few countries, largely in Egypt, in Morocco, in Tunisia, in South Africa, and part of Nigeria and adjoining countries. But what is important about Africa and corona at this stage is that it is clubbed with several other pandemic-like diseases in Africa. They are not one or two. The malaria, cholera, you have Ebola also in Congo coming up. So several such diseases are there which are making things much more complex. As we understand, the corona needs isolation, lesser movement. But all those diseases which Africa is facing currently, it's something that needs more visit to doctors, more visit to hospitals, and that is making things much more complex. And corona crisis is going to overtake many of the other disease that is prevalent over there. So the death rate in corona, as you said, the current figure of today is around 35,000 infected cases. But death rate for corona crisis in last 3 days has been around 15,000 only, 1,500 only. And therefore, corona per se is not identified for many of the deaths that are taking place. There are many other diseases that are taking the toll in Africa. So that's the one aspect you must understand. Secondly, the disease is still confined to a few countries in big number. As I said, Tunisia, Morocco, Egypt, South Africa, and part of Nigeria. But it's spreading gradually now. And we are yet to see the peak in this one. Clubbed with this is the fact that Africa has very poor health infrastructure compared to the other region, despite the fact that there have been several pandemics like Ebola and other things. As we know, as per the World Health Organization statistics, entire Africa has 2,000 ventilators. The 41 countries from below have only 200 ventilators. The bed availability in Africa, according to World Health Organization report, is 5 ICU beds per 1 million population. So these are the figures that crisis when it to
I'm afraid your sound was giving a little trouble last few words. So could you repeat the last few sentences again? I think the others also felt there was some problem with the sound.
World Health Organization's statistic health infrastructure in Africa, that entire Africa has around 2,000 ventilators only. The 41 countries from below, that is low country in the hierarchy of infrastructure, together 41 countries have 200 ventilators. The availability of ICU, as per the World Health Organization statistic, per 1 million population is 5 beds. So you can imagine kind of lack of the infrastructure that Africa had. Along with this, it still has many other diseases that are to be handled with the equal priority. Ebola has also erupted now in some of the Congo part, and there are many other diseases that are also now coming up. So Corona has a complex problem, how to handle, isolate Corona with other disease. Along with the fact Africa has very poor statistical information. So the real number of people who are infected because of this and the death that is taking place due to this is still not known. In terms of support, as you very rightly said, that the world is now engaged largely to manage and combat domestic priority of containing a corona crisis. Africa is not priority for many of these countries in the past, not even now. But for countries like India, which has always put very strong emphasis on its solidarity with Africa, it has been something that is now surfacing in a big way. As we know that in our contact with Africa through various India-Africa Forum summits since 2008, health is also one of the important priority sectors. We had already started telemedicine by connecting several centers for health diagnosis with top health institution in India. We also export huge quantity of our pharmaceuticals. 14% of our total export and around 40% along with petroleum is pharmaceuticals. So top two items in terms of our export to Africa. We had been working with African institution through our India-Africa Forum Summit funding to establish several institutes to manage their health problems. So we have a history. And at this stage, when we ourselves are combating Corona back home, we just cannot forget Africa. And therefore, Prime Minister has taken it up at higher level. He spoke with 3 presidents of Africa. He spoke with South African president. He spoke with the Egypt president. He spoke with the president of Uganda. And he committed India's support in this crisis. He said whatever India could do in terms of supplying medicine, in terms of supplying kits, India will do that. And we had started early shipments to Mauritius, Seychelles, and we had taken initiative to do that. As late as 26th, our foreign minister made an announcement. He tweeted whole day on Africa that today is a day for Africa, and it's the time to show solidarity. We are sending medicine and medical support to 25 countries in Africa, and India. He rang up 4 countries foreign minister: Comoros, Burkina Faso, Uganda, and Mali. And he promised India support in this hour of crisis. India is supplying them not just hydroxychloroquine and paracetamol, but 7 other medicines that are required by them in times of this crisis. Along with that, India also committed, according to its tweets and the report in Economic Times, that India will provide 7 additional medicines that are required by Africa. India also committed that it will give kits and medical equipments required for combating Corona. He also promised that India will use its e-platform, which already exists in Africa through e-medicine project under India-Africa Forum Summit, by attaching top medical institutions in India to provide them support. And the whole day of tweeting by EAM also wanted to communicate to Africans that though we are engrossed into our domestic issues of combating Corona, we are not forgetting African friends. And we are there for them and will help as much as possible. And we are remembering when the world, when the world is trying to address their own domestic issues. So that's the way India has demonstrated that it wants to help Africa in this crisis, and it has extended several kinds of support to them. And it's part of India's overall diplomatic posturing that when the world is combating corona, India is trying to reach out wherever it could go and extend all the support that it can in terms of medicine, in terms of the kids, and in terms of reaching out to them and sharing with them its own experience in terms of how to combat this corona crisis back home. India is therefore being sought after by African countries in this time of crisis because they are looking towards India, which has similar number of people, and by several steps that India has taken and the kind of medicine it is supposed to have, which is effective in lack of any other clear-cut vaccination, that they are looking towards India to provide those supports, and India is committing and it's ready to share with them whatever medicine and medical kits it has. Therefore, India is exhibiting as part of its global posturing in terms of its medical diplomacy to support African countries that India is willing to share, willing to contribute, and willing to punch up to its weight, as it has been always accused to punch below its weight in international affairs. So it is trying to establish itself as a responsible global player, which is part of its medical diplomacy in Africa as well. I will stop here and I can take questions later on if you have.
Thank you very much, Professor Dubey, for those very interesting and informative remarks. And before I move on to the next speaker, I just wanted to sort of flag a few points that came from what you said. They're prompted by what you said, and they are more in the nature of observations or perhaps queries on which you might like to, reflect a bit more on during the Q&A session. Now, the first is that you mentioned about 2,000 ventilators across Africa. That's like 54 members of the African Union, vast continent. And only 2 days ago, when we had invited, among others, Dr. Devi Shetty, to join us for a webinar on the pandemics covering the health sector, he had said that it's not just good enough to have ventilators. Ventilators cannot be operated by the likes of you and me. They have to be operated by a professional anesthesiologist. And unless you have anesthesiologists, ventilators are no good. In other words, Africa will also have to look at the number of healthcare workers that it has. Countries may, out of goodwill and support, give them ventilators and give them many other things, but who will operate them? Do they have that kind of robust human resources in the healthcare sector? This is the crying need of the hour for many of us, including Africa. The second thing is somewhere along this course of this COVID crisis, we have seen how China, which has so far always touted and tom-tommed about being a very great friend of Africa, is in the middle of a maelstrom about allegations of racial discrimination against the Africans in China, and that kind of erodes a little bit from the kind of profile that they have quite successfully and often with opposition built in and across Africa. But are we facing any of the same sort of reverberations, similar sort of issues here? Because there is a history to that in India also. Now and then, the Africans have come and said, look, this has happened to our people. And so I think we have to be mindful of this at this particular point of time. And if we are able to manage it well, we will have a slight optical advantage also. So that's important. And the third thing is more of a query that should we really be focusing on all of Africa, like a one-size-fits-all approach, or should we be looking more closely at developing good relations through this crisis with, say, particular countries, targeting those that are members of the OIC. We may need them in the OIC. In general, of course, all African countries are important since they'll support our global aspirations, including membership of the UN, etc. So should we be doing that? Should we be looking at cooperating through regional structures or only on a bilateral basis? So, I mean, that's the kind of broad reflection that I thought we may make in due course. I now come to Professor Sachin Chaturvedi, DG RIS. The floor is yours, Professor Chaturvedi.
Thank you, Ambassador Chinoy, for very substantive remarks in the beginning. And I also must thank Professor Ajay Dubey for very exhaustive presentation. Not much is left for me to add, but let me make an effort. I have put a PowerPoint together, which I shared with the webmasters. So probably it would be here on our screens. As I see the evolving needs, and I think the dimensions of our engagements, they are diverse. And I think Ambassador Chinoy has raised a very pertinent point, whether we deal with all of 54 countries at the bilateral level, or do we deal with regional groupings, or we make some choices. In my view, I think given the fact that the market would be getting integrated, the idea of continent-wide free trade agreement is an effort by the African Union and the community to have their own sort of free trade agreement in force from July onwards. I think it's pertinent on our part to see that the larger dimensions of our engagement are addressed, and that I think would bring in the questions of how do we move forward. I thought that there are sort of 4 points which we can look into before we actually start this discussion today. First and foremost is India's own experience in managing COVID crisis, and I think this is of key significance for us to get that document, what different dimensions of our crisis management we have addressed, and I thought I would bring that up in few slides, and then we'll try to see how the complementarities for cooperation are, and from that point of view can derive some lessons in terms of going forward. So can we have the first slide, Piyush? Yes, so this is largely the kind of issues we would be covering. So next one. Yeah, if you look at the mega challenges that we have here, the morbidity rates are not extremely high, and fortunately, Africa as a whole, as Ambassador Chinoy pointed out, and Professor Dubey also alluded to it, is pretty on lower side given the larger global sort of challenges that we have. Next. I have tried to put together the numbers that that were available. Unfortunately, Africa has floated a dashboard where you are getting real-time numbers. So today at 1 o'clock, this was the number this afternoon, and we have taken out these numbers. As you see, unlike in the beginning where the concentration was very high in the northern Africa, now you see that it is spreading across the continent, and concentrations are more where external orientation of the economies are larger, and that's where you see South Africa and Egypt bearing the most of the burden here, and that I think is what is coming out from this graph. Next, please. This is India's own experience, and here the black is the line that shows deaths, and as you would see, the losses are minimized in India. So we need to understand what has actually happened, as we all have seen this history making in front of our eyes. But I thought it would be pertinent to bring them here as we evolve templates for our cooperation with other countries. Next, please. Here, the COVID crisis in Africa, I think Ambassador Chinoy very rightly mentioned that Lesotho and Comoros are the two cases, and indeed that is still the case this afternoon when I checked the dashboard. The countries that have reported the cases are 52, but recoveries are not that bad. They are equally high, and as I said, the morbidity with the virus is minimized by Africa as well. So this is something which is very encouraging, and I think some sort of crisis management has already been initiated by the continent. Next. Now, let me quickly go through some Indian experience, and I will just quickly run through these slides. There are some, of course, peculiar distinctions that we have, the size, the population, the immense diversity, the vibrant and pluralistic society that we have, the trust in government and governance systems, and of course, the ecosystem pertaining to science, technology, innovation, but also pharmaceuticals, biomedical, and information technology. So all this provides the necessary STI ecosystem in the country. Next, please. I would say that the initial action by the government that I think was something that could help us initiate and act in time, and that as Prime Minister has been continuously articulating from different platforms. The idea has been with the centrality of citizens, and we could put a very integrated framework right up front, whether to have health infrastructure or ensuring medical supplies, or bringing in the bands that are required, managing the administrative architecture for the whole initiative. As has emerged, Prime Minister himself has been at the center. And then when we say citizen-led crisis management, the civil society, the health workers, the science, technology, innovations, the media, Prime Minister talking to all the different actors, be that chief ministers or heads of villages or the media, the radio jockeys and anchors. The idea and the message has largely been in terms of the Ministry of Health led sort of processes where the inputs from the experts and the leadership by the Prime Minister, I think, has played an important role. And this all I have tried to couch within the framework of effective communication. And that, I think, is crux. So when we evolve our templates for cooperation with the partner countries, this is something that that we should put right up front in terms of catalyzing the processes of this nature. Next. And this, I think, is evident in terms of how the leveraging of technology has happened. All of us have Arogya Setu on our apps, and I think that is important. The e-Gram Swaraj portal is another one that is launched on 24th of April. So that, I think, also largely captures the issues which are of great significance in this effective communication strategy. This is, I think, further supplemented by state governments and nudging them a bit to see how their own packages are coming in, how from January till April the sustenance of the efforts by administration is required, and to what extent these packages are dovetailing the efforts we are making through a digital economy, identifying the right beneficiaries, minimizing the leakages, and providing the direct benefit transfers that are of significance. Here, I think other African countries would also have to see, since they also have huge MSME networks, how the informal economy and MSME can get advantage when we are talking about loss of livelihood security, when we are talking of lives and livelihoods, what kind of issues are coming up and in what way we benefit farmers, we identify microfinance, ensure food security, and ensure that the banks connect. And that's where the role of the fiscal policy and monetary policy together come in, I think, in a very important manner. Next. So there, the issue is how do we address global norms? And India's Reserve Bank of India has given a very clear message by not blindly following global norms. I think the 17th April press conference by the Governor Reserve Bank was very clear in terms of India going beyond commitments to Basel III norms. And that's what I think we need to share with African countries, that WHO, India is working closely with, but it is not that all the advice of WHO we are accepting. And that's what applies to finance and economy as well. We need not be blind for our commitment to Basel III norms and other global commitments. And this gives the maneuvering space to state. And that, I think, is a very important message that we should communicate through our own experience and our own results that we are getting. And this is largely in terms of the definition of NPA. Why in a developing country, 90th day should be the day for NPA. Unfortunately, earlier RBI followed in 12, 13, 14, this, but gradually we have come out of that norm, and 17th April was a watershed in terms of coming out with our own approach, and that I think is very, very important. Next slide, please. And this is Arogya Setu I have already talked about, but many state governments are using drones, they are using GIS system, and also for tracking are using big data mining of the mobile data that they are getting. And this is largely in terms of how the Bluetooth and GPS devices are to be used for tracking. And that I think is extremely important for several state governments where density of population is very high. And then I cannot say that all citizens are irresponsible, but quite a few of them haven't shown the sense of responsibility that is needed. So how from technology you can use a bit of nudging, you can spot them and you can put them back in the expected places where protection and safety of everyone is ensured. Next. This is what I think is another Indian experience with 1.3 billion people, that we could identify hotspots. And if you see a number of districts that are there, India has around 736 districts, and out of that, 170 districts in 20 states and 5 union territories are in red zone. So hotspots, as I have put here, are the hotspots. And then you have 207 districts in orange, which is marked here in yellow. And then is the green zone with the 359. So when we are planning exit strategy, I think it is equally important with Africa to share what the exit plan should be and how do we come out of lockdown, as India is also exploring. But this is, I think, the mantra here is TTIQ, test, track, isolate, and quarantine. And this, I think, has played an extremely important role in moving forward. Next slide, please. And this is, I think, largely through seamless convergence. And I think 4 major points here in terms of seamless convergence in next 2-3 slides is that first and foremost is to do away with our paranoia with international commitments. Second, bring in private partnership together. Many private hospitals have been leveraged. So that false distinction that Washington consensus has imposed on several states in Africa, I think we have to encourage African countries to come out of that mindset of distinguishing between public and private. So all have come together. Third and important is to create parallel with the allopathic systems so that the traditional medicine system and African countries have strong connect. And fortunately, Ayush Ministry is in touch with Africa. So that, I think, is extremely important in terms of how Indian government is approaching with the Ayush sector here, agriculture and our own migration. If you look at urbanization in Africa, the story is not very different from Africa and from India. In fact, 2017, there was a major UN report, UNDP report on development experience of the urbanization. And it brought out clearly that there is huge migration in urban areas. And if reverse migration starts in 12 cities of Africa that have been identified by the African Union, many of our own experiences would be very handy for them. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. And this is, I think, the Ayush dimension that I have already talked about, the immunity building and other formulations that are of significance. Next slide. I'm running out of my time, so can you please fast? Some pre-existing initiatives of India probably would be extremely important. And Ambassador Chinoy, I feel that when we share our COVID experience, we should also build on our earlier experience, like the Aadhaar-linked e-payment services, the idea of people-centric development, but also bringing in this traditional knowledge, Startup India. So now, out of 13 ICMR recognized test kit suppliers, 4 are startups that are providing this. So I think this is extremely important dimension of our engagement and creating digital payment platform. Or in 2017, we launched the National Biopharma Mission. Our ICMR and Africa, when Dr. Bhan was there, had already initiated. Fortunately, I was part of that initiative with Africa in 2017. So we have seen how biotechnology is closely connected with African countries. Next slide. Already Professor Dubey has elaborated at length, so I would not get into it. PM has already spoken to quite a few of our partners from Africa. Next. Care beyond borders is a unique, I would say, way we can describe our initiative. Both Ambassador Chinoy and Professor Dubey have captured what has been shared, but I think it is important to emphasize here the need for everyone to contribute, and Prime Minister's leadership in the region in South Asia is an example for other countries to see how big countries can provide a sort of model for everyone. India gave 10 million, but others have also generously supported according to their capacity. And in South Asia, we could create a fund of 18.3 million. So no need to depend on anyone. Local resource mobilization is the best strategy for the countries to match, and do not wait for ODA or development assistance to come in. Next slide, please. Next slide. Next. Yeah. So Africa, Brazil, all countries have profusely thanked India for cooperation. Next slide. Next. Yes. So here, a couple of countries where we have already reached out, almost 50 countries we have reached out to in terms of our assistance. Next slide. Yes, and this is what I wanted to emphasize, Ambassador Chinoy. The import dependency for health sector is huge, and India should extend a cooperative sort of endeavors, not only for trade, but also for local production, encouraging our firms to produce medical devices, pharmaceutical products, taking advantage of our trade and investment linkages with Africa. And if you see countries after countries, all the 52 countries that are affected by COVID are hugely dependent. At RIS, we have churned out a huge data to come up with this observation. Next slide. Next slide. Yeah. Next slide, please. Next. Yeah. Next. Yeah. Here, this I think is important, and yeah, this one. And here I would close. If you look at health sector, there are 4 areas which are dependent on others, like for instance, agriculture, digital technologies, and development practices. In health sector, digitalization, the personal protection gears that are required, medical devices, API supply chain, vaccine development platforms, training of paramedicals, which I think Dr. Shetty very rightly emphasized, and Ambassador Chinoy alluded to that, developing domestic biotechnology capacities. I think these are the areas which I think are extremely important, and they dovetail with the SDG commitments from nutritional food security point of view, from digital technology perspective, and also development practices. And here as you would see, Ambassador Chinoy, the last column talks about the convergence of the fiscal and monetary policy, maintaining adequate liquidity, new norms for credit rating, and financing from small and medium enterprises. Next slide, please. And this is, I think, important, as RIS has initiated this establishment of Global Development Center, where we are tracking development initiatives by all the 54 African countries and trying to see where the scope for them to learn from India is. And we are right now in the process of benchmarking Indian COVID management strategies for Africa. So I would stop here. Ambassador Chinoy, thanks for giving me additional time and for your patience. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Chaturvedi, for those very, very perceptive remarks and the expanse that you covered, particularly with a clear-cut take on the economic dimensions, the kind of learning that we can share with Africa, having gone through a number of processes here in India and having learned from the same. And now I have a few comments to make before I ask people to ask questions and make comments from the floor. You did seem to suggest that there is scope for Ayush in Africa, and you kind of pegged that remark on the fact that Africa as a continent traditionally and culturally, civilizationally uses a lot of traditional medicine. Of course, there is a difference between Ayurveda and strictly what is called traditional medicine, which is not really often supported by empirical evidence, and it's more to do with sort of tales that you hear within tribal cultures, and you know that a certain plant is good for something or the other. Now, but if you say that there is scope for Ayush, then should India, as a matter of strategy, and having such faith as we have, abundant faith in Ayush, ourselves be pushing more of Ayush by way of our assistance into Africa, or more of allopathic pharmaceuticals? Because to me, if we have equal faith in both and we are ready to use Ayush at home as well, and there is an opportunity, why not simply move into Africa predominantly with Ayush? Unless we have doubts about it ourselves, unless we're going to be proved wrong that no, it's not working or something. So that's one thing. I'm glad you covered migration, but I suppose migration in Africa may or may not be. I mean, I'm not sure. That's why I'm asking. Is it of the same dimensions as in India? Now, I fully endorse what you said about this being an opportunity, not just to sort of help Africa, but particularly to promote cooperation in the digital space, in artificial intelligence. And if this is the premise, then given that the lockdown might be a prolonged scenario, there could be future sort of episodes of the virus resurfacing and more lockdowns in the future. How about creating a program of e-learning in our universities and institutions, and abiding structure that provides e-learning to African students? In other words, that people don't have to come all the way to India, but can register for e-courses, and make that a permanent feature of universities and colleges across the country, whereby African students can actually earn some kind of a degree from Indian institutions, but only through online courses, and that be made permanent as a structure. Is there scope for a SARC-like fund for Africa to be created under the India-Africa Summit Forum, with India as one of the primary donors, setting off the whole thing, and then of course African countries come in as in the case of SARC with their own individual capacities from each according to his own sort of ability to pay. Is there scope for greater manufacturing from India by Indian companies in Africa as a result, whatever they might make, whether it is Ayush products or whether it is PPE or whether it is pharmaceuticals. So outbound investment from India to Africa, is this an opportunity? Is this the time when we'll be welcomed the most? Now, I have a few questions which I'll read out before I come back to both of you again, our eminent panelists. Anand Kumar from Dr. Anand Kumar from our institute, who has also spent some time in Africa as the ICCR chair. Through the ICCR, he was there for a couple of years in Ethiopia. And he says that under the ITEC program, we have started training healthcare workers recently. AIMS Bhubaneswar and Chhattisgarh are training them. That's just for information. That training is being done online. Now, Dr. Ruchita Berry, who has helped set up today's webinar, and I thank her for that, also from our institute, she says, she asks, will India like to emulate the Cuban model, send health workers to partner countries in need of support? That, of course, presumes that we have enough of them. And though we've been sending them here and there in Maldives and nearby countries and Kuwait and some other places, but all over the world, I'm not so sure whether we can do it. But the experts will answer. Obviously, she says, African countries need help, given the fact that India has to take care of its domestic economy. Will it be possible for India to really maintain the same scale of developmental cooperation and assistance with African countries in the future? I mean, this is an extended problem that we have. So she wants to know whether we can keep up our commitments to Africa. We have about $10 billion worth of lines of credit, about $600 million worth of grant assistance. And so are we going to be able to keep up that momentum? May I now request Professor Ajay Dubey to come in again and perhaps reflect on what I said by way of my interventions and some of these remarks that have come from the floor. Professor Dubey?
Thank you. Yes. As you pointed out yourself regarding ventilators and other high-tech services, the Government of India has already started this training program for health workers and for upgrading the health services in Africa. It is confined to a few countries, but that can be extended. And I think that has to be increased because India is largely focusing in Africa on capacity and human resource development. And the health sector is one of the important ones. Along with that, I will also come back to what you raised about training African students through e-network. That was suggested in the first and second India-Africa Forum Summit in a big way to establish a e-university. A huge project was launched and they were planned to train most of the African countries' student population through that network by establishing that in Africa. But somehow the 6 hubs that were established, it couldn't perform well. But that's giving the India's own involvement and own acceptance of e-learning now, even in top academic institutions. I think we need to focus on this because this is the future and that is where the strength, and we can not only educate our students but also educate Africans, which are big in number. Coming back to the second point that you read about China and India, the issue is not just one country and other, it's much more complex. It also involves African countries and different African countries' framework of linking with India and Africa. India, China, and Africa. Many of them have regimes which are autocratic, not very responsible, and the Chinese framework of cooperation of dealing only with the people in power suits them. And therefore, they might face backlash from the people, but they might be very popular with the regime. Whereas in our case, we have large number of projects and programs which are people-centric. We have human resource development, capacity building, under ITech training and sending the experts. So these are more related to the people, and we don't face such such resentment. But China has. But China also has the advantage of technology. China has the advantage of money. We are the big player in Africa in terms of medicine. In terms of generic drugs, we have huge market. We have huge edge over China. But the point is that 2/3 of what you call the API, the ingredients for that medicine, has to be imported from China by India. We are facing, so you understand the complexity that is there. Therefore, even if there is a backlash, the amount of clout that China enjoys in terms of technology, in terms of money, and in terms of its value-free engagement in Africa, we have a major challenge. And the kind of approach that we have with Africa needs to be re-looked into. Coming back to the block approach or bilateral approach, I think that has been a question since long. You know, in 1962, when we had Indo-China War, since this issue is important for us to decide, and we have not been able to make much headway of this. Under Afro-Asian research and non-alignment, India thought entire Africa is inside of India. When India-China war took place, only 4 countries supported. In 1964, we had a meeting of all states in Africa and India to say, what should we do? Why Africa respond this way? And they decided to move away from a continental level approach to bilateral level approach. And they worked on that for some time. But when in 1971 South-South came, then again it became a continental level approach. India-Africa Forum Summit, again it became 3-tier approach. First continental with 50%, and then you have...
Pardon me for butting in, but my query was also more related to a strategic sort of level at which we could perhaps think of operating, for instance, particularly the African countries that are OIC members. I mean, that's the kind of nuancing that, when we make policy and implement it, we need to keep various identities in mind. I mean, it's just a thought that occurred to me. Go ahead, please.
No, it's true that there are different identities in Africa. Which are there. There is OIC group, but groups like OIC works with the global community. They can go against their own member, like in Libya, to start a war against them. They cannot protect their own members when it comes to that, because they might have some strength and some position against India, but they are not independent people. They have their own. So if you need to handle them, it's not through your bilateral approach. You have to have a global approach. They are much more amenable. Anyway, the point remains, the bilateral remains important for us. But let me just tell you why bilateral has a limitation. 9 countries forms around 89% of our trade in Africa. Are we going to be a major partner in Africa? If not, this way, then we have to increase our access to different countries. And all other countries, except the 9 countries, are not hostile to India. There are many which are neutral. We have to move to them. There are some which are very friendly to our adversary countries, which is okay. But a huge number of them we had not been able to approach. And that's why I would suggest that we should not only focus on those which are important for us in our bilateral relation, in our strategic relation, but also make those country friends which are neutral and amenable to Indian friendship. And this is the time you should move to these countries. I'll stop here.
No, before I let go of you, there is someone who has posed a direct question to you. That's Dr. Gautam Kumar Jha. Wants to know from you,
yes,
Professor Dubey, how China is doing in Africa. How is China doing in Africa compared to India in terms of providing aid or support pertaining to COVID-19? I mean, that's a tough question, isn't it, right now? So,
well, I would only request him on 5th of May. There is an international webinar which African Studies Association is organizing, where Chinese, Nigerian, South Africans, and Indian researchers would be there. So he will get most of his answer. He's welcome at 3 o'clock on 5th of May.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. No, before I move to Professor Sachin Chaturvedi, I just want to read out a few more of these questions to make it a headier mix for all of us. Now, Arpita from our institute wants to know, how should India gear up for the continental free trade area generally, and particularly in regard to helping with the COVID crisis? Then we have again Dr. Anand Kumar, who feels that you know, loss of livelihood, potential for popular uprising, food shortages, terrorism, all this is potentially a feature in Africa. What's the kind of impact that many of these things, like terrorism, for instance, will there be an impact on that? What kind of impact will COVID have on current peace keeping and support operations that are there? He's gone into gender-based violence, and I don't know if you can cover all that, either of you, but those are some remarks that came from there. Also, a question from Rashmi. I can't read out the whole name. It's a sentence. But the first part reads, Rashmi, she wants to know to what extent trial of vaccines in some of the African countries is justifiable. I don't know if there's a very large number of guinea pig kind of experiments going on, but is this really justified or not? Professor Chaturvedi, the floor is yours.
Thank you, sir. I think you have raised four very, very important points right in the beginning, and I would begin with that. I think the Ayush Ministry's engagement with Africa should be part of our core strategy in the health sector. We have been in touch with African missions in Geneva to have a joint WHO strategy. Last year, we already had a roundtable with them. We have been trying to address the global governance through intellectual property, so WIPO and WHO providing. And I do agree with you of the distinction between traditional medicine and Ayush domain knowledge specific traditional medicine. So I think what has happened now is that immediately after the crisis, Prime Minister almost cajoled the Ayush Ministry to come up with a protocol that is required for scientific validation of the immunity or immunity enhancing medication that is needed. And you would be glad to know, sir, that within 2 weeks, all these streams of Ayush, Ayurveda is one, but Siddha, Unani, homeopathy, even Tibetans, they all got together, and respective sphere protocols have already been evolved. So that, I think, is an absolutely fascinating development. PM has already instructed the Commerce Minister to spearhead commercial production of these protocols, and several states, including Tamil Nadu and Kerala, have already established more than 100 immunity development centers for coming up with CADA and many other formulations that are there. I think Ayush should be part of our strategy to engage with Africa when we talk about health sector. As I mentioned in the beginning, Ayush Ministry is in direct touch with several of African countries. So I think Ministry of External Affairs and Government of India in general should give further impetus to this engagement as we prepare for India-Africa Forum Summit, but also for the crisis at hand. And I think that also brings me to this whole question of digital and e-learning that you have talked of. In fact, as Dr. Anand Kumar mentioned about the ITech, where AIMS Raipur is engaged, RIS, led by Ambassador Amar Sinha and Dr. Srinath Reddy of PHFI. So PHFI RIS, we have finished one round of a training of paramedicos for COVID crisis management, a 5-day course that started on 25th of April and finished yesterday. Another batch with almost 48 participants would start on 5th of May for another 5 days. So this is how several government and several non-government initiatives for capacity building that are already on. And this is no degree course, but definitely a sort of recognition in terms of the diploma and the capacity. Your point on migration, sir, I think is very pertinent. The 2017 report that I was talking about of urbanization in Africa is clear in mega cities, and 11 cities have been identified as potential danger zones for multiplication of COVID-19 virus across these cities. And as statistics on the EU dashboard is showing, these cities have really become hotspots now. So I do not see if reverse migration would be very different if panic happens, but probably they might not have the social media that worked in India, as we all know, that created the panic which happened in some cities. I think that's where the difference comes in. Your last point, sir, about SARC fund, I think is very, very important point, and I would like to combine that with what Dr. Ruchita Berry has also raised in context of line of credit. I think, sir, time has come for India to revisit the development cooperation portfolio. For last 20 years at RIS, we have pooled together the data of lines of credit as our development cooperation portfolio component. And I find that it is hovering around 70 to 80%. So if you put all development cooperation expenditure together in one basket, it has varied from 62% to 84% in last 20 years. Since this has been sort of revitalized. And now, given the economic crisis which is unfolding, starting right from Nigeria downwards, which is the biggest economy, and you go down. So I think time has come when India should encourage not only its own policymakers, but also the partner countries to think beyond lines of credit. And we need to bring in market mechanisms here to see how non-sovereign guarantee credits can be leveraged for supporting partner countries. And this is fairly possible with the active patronizing role that Government of India can play. But bring in African Development Bank and others. If you sir recall, Exim Bank and AFDB, along with the then ILFS, had floated a company called Kokuza, which was supporting and funding. Somehow our interest went away and we did not go ahead on that track. I think time has come then that we realize that sovereign guarantees have their own costs, and budget of Indian government, as Ruchita has very rightly suggested, do not anymore permit us to have this kind of engagement. But definitely human resource engagement, engagement with technology, engagement with trade, they can be strengthened. In fact, sir, at RIS, we have developed this theory of development compact, in which we say that development is possible through 5 different ways. The first, of course, is concessional grant, which is LOC. Second is pure grant. Third is technology. Fourth is market access. And fifth is capacity building. So if you retain other 4 elements and go for non-sovereign credit, then I think you really hit the nail right there. And there you very rightly identified possibility of SARC-like fund in Africa. The whole emphasis on local resource mobilization is extremely important for us to go forward with. The idea of vaccine trials in Africa and CFTA. CFTA is very, very important. As I said, our companies, instead of looking at trade as the only possibility, should now look at the investment opportunities. And if we come up with this non-sovereign guarantee credits, then I think task would be much easier for, say, Jan Irrigation, or there are several private firms like Kirloskar, several, I don't want to name several firms, but if you look at the key exporters, they should be encouraged to invest in Africa to produce at the local level and see that we are part of the common market as it is coming in. And the question that I think has raised is whether we are prepared for CFTA. Just last week, I was part of a webinar which CII and Ministry of Commerce organized on CFTA preparedness. And I think there's much more to be desired than where we are. The African Union has already decided that from July, this CFTA would take off. They have already decided that Ghana would host the secretariat. The new Secretary General has already taken over. So our bilateral engagement with Ghana, our support with the AU should be leveraged to have India's stand there. And I'm glad that somebody also raised the question of the big elephant in the room, and that is China in the COVID crisis management, but also in the CFTA, which we cannot overlook. And I think that's where largely the issue comes in. I would just close by making one observation on the last question on vaccine trials in Africa, and poor are usually the scapegoat. I think we have to realize that apart from national legislations, the regional legislations in Africa, particularly led by African Union, are pretty strong on clinical trials. India and ICMR in particular has also helped strengthen the clinical trials, but WHO is also doing it, and that's where, though no question has been raised, but I would say my own would like to bring in the role of the multilateral institutions in a crisis management like this, and particularly the role of WHO in all of this. And that's where I think the clinical trials is also a hot issue. Earlier, there were several allegations when WHO was criticized to have soft corner on US multinationals for clinical trials. And now with China, the corona case has brought the limelight on China. But I think it is important that the multilateral institutions are encouraged to be far more responsible and adequately reflect the interest of all the members and not of the key donors to these institutions. I would stop here, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Very helpful comments again from both the panelists. Lest I gave you the impression that we'll let you off so easily, I actually want to pepper you with a couple of more questions. We have a few more minutes. I think we can stretch it to about 4:15. So that's about maybe 7 to 10 more minutes. The reason I mentioned that SARC-like fund was because I felt that it might be good at this stage, and I'm glad that you echoed some of these feelings, that India might scale back, review and prioritize its layout or outlay for Africa over the next few years. Given that there will be economic issues in Africa and a downturn here as well, we need to get bigger bang for the buck. So perhaps less of lines of credit, perhaps a few more targeted programs of grant assistance, and above all, what we can concentrate it in a fund with primary focus on healthcare, because with the sudden salience that healthcare has acquired, and by the way, it's going to be reflected down the line in our budgets also. We might find that we will no longer allocate the traditional X percentage. It might be X into 2, given the kind of focus we have. So I think our grant assistance also must kind of veer in favor of the current priorities and reflect that accordingly. Samir Bhattacharya wants to know that if Africa were to receive a lot of help monetarily from China during the crisis, what kind of reaction is likely to be elicited there? I mean, in light of A, their abiding profile in Africa, and B, some of the more recent developments, I suppose, in terms of discrimination and stuff like that. Second part of his question is, if African countries were to, if ever, take a decision similar to the one that we took in terms of reviewing our FDI sort of norms, then what are the implications that it could have in the WTO? Now, I'm not an expert at the WTO, but I suppose the WTO does not go into this aspect, is what I understand. And in any case, one must draw a distinction between FDI as in FDI and portfolio investment. And it's easy to say WTO, but then WTO may not be the sort of main body to deal with it. But of course, Penny, for your thoughts on that, Professor Chaturvedi, and then I'll swing back to Professor Dubey. In the meantime, a former colleague of mine, Ambassador Manju Seth, who's with us today, she worked with me many moons ago, and I've known her for the last 30 plus years, 35 years now. And we were together in the XP division when I was OSD press relations. So I have very fond memories, and I see her there on screen, and it'll be really remiss on my part if I didn't reflect her question as well. She says, will India be able to capitalize on the resentment building up against China uh, post-COVID? In other words, can we kind of fish in these troubled waters a bit and get away with it? Yes, please. First, Professor Chaturvedi. Yes.
Thank you, sir. I think Ambassador Manju Seth has raised a very pertinent point in terms of how we leverage that. And in one of our research outputs, we have discussed this possibility by suggesting that at G20, several of the developed countries raised the alarm of antibiotic resistance, and the AMR initiative was launched. Now the time has come when India should take a leadership at the current G20 presidency, and the summit is not very far, to talk about an initiative where epidemiological global initiatives are the platforms where we can bring all the countries which are adversely affected by this crisis together. So we need to create platform where people who are adversely affected come together on one platform. So I think first and foremost would be some sort of a strategy to bring them forward. And I think that would also be the beginning of not exactly anti-China tirade, but definitely possibility of targeting future, if at all this was, as several commentaries now are far more strongly putting that this was not something that emanated out of Wuhan's animal market. It actually originated from laboratory. It is a man-made virus. It is part of a biological warfare strategy. These facts and figures are coming out everywhere, and in a highly profound manner. Countries and diplomats, as Ambassador Chinoy would, I do not know whether he would like to confirm it here, but definitely I think more and more diplomats are discussing this in selected circles as to what exactly triggered, and I think the literature and an institution like IDSA would be best placed to tell us what exactly might have happened. But as I'm seeing the commentaries, Madam Ambassador, this is, I think, becoming more and more a sort of story where precipitation and coming of countries together is possible. And we should provide a platform, not looking to be positioning ourselves against China, but definitely a more healthier and much more open discussion possibilities. Coming back on the issue of the fund that Ambassador Chinoy raised, I think, sir, if you look at the data, in 2017-18, India provided grants of something like $1.5 billion. And our lines of credit, they were of $5.9 billion. And we spent around sort of $41 million on our capacity building programs. You total all that, which comes close to $7.4 billion, 79% of this is spent on LOC. So even if you take out the LOC figure alone of $5.9 billion, this is a good sum to start a fund with. and we put it on the table in Africa, and we say let other countries cooperate, and we are here with our fund, and let or individual countries come forward. Probably strategy to engage, as was your first question to Professor Dubey, whether we do it bilaterally or we do regionally or continent-wise. I think in this case, the impact on specific countries is varying. So would be their commitment. So given South Africa's huge partnership with India and huge impact on South Africa of the casualties, it would be good to begin with South Africa and a couple of others, bring Egypt and Morocco, Tunisia, which are also adversely affected. So continent-wide, but since our interest predominantly is in the eastern coast of the Indian Ocean, Madagascar, Mauritius would also be a good partner. So a 5 or 6 country fund to manage COVID crisis, and we put our best foot forward with the science, technology, and diagnostic kits, and form a platform which PM discussed with the Prime Minister of Sweden for a joint research platform for identifying the vaccines. The plasma-based diagnostic kit is another major issue which is being pushed in by several countries. The intellectual property rights, whether pooling of patents is possible or compulsory licensing is the only option, or we create a health impact fund, HIF, for compensating firms which are doing good innovation. So bringing in private sector actors and also government institutions and agencies, I think would be, sir, a good beginning for our regional partnership in terms of funds that are required. I would stop here.
Thank you very much again, Professor Chaturvedi. Professor Dubey, you can have the last word before we actually close the proceedings for the day. Please have the last word. I mean, you can reflect on anything that has been said so far. Professor Dubey.
Yes. Am I audible?
Yes, you are, please. Go ahead.
Africa has a different experience. African Union, which is political, strategic, a body of identity, a body of pride, gets 67% of its budget from outside. Its building is not constructed by Africans, but constructed and handed over by Chinese. The key was handed over by a petroleum manager to African Union head. Everything that is provided inside is given by Chinese. You look at the different kind of plan and activities that has been launched by international donors. They stick only to the extent that the fund is available. In my opinion, CFTA will also largely depend on this, how much incentive is given to make it operational. So I have my reservation given the African experience of the past and the way even taken up seriously by the local governments. The second thing I would like to reflect about this Africans being the guinea pig for testing the vaccine, and that became controversial because the French health ministers and doctors announced that their vaccine has been tested in Africa for corona and all that, and that became a huge controversy in France, and then people started questioning and African countries started responding to that. But the fact is that besides the medicine and the vaccination from outside, country like Senegal, if you discover the reports last 1 week, has come out with $2 testing kits, which is 100% secure. It's still being tested by them. It's not kits, the lab testing that they have started doing. This has been reported aggressively in several. I don't know how far this is reliable, but this is what the government and the doctors are projecting. So they are also making their own effort into doing that. So there is a capacity that they need to develop that exists there. And I think in capacity building things, we should focus on that. I fully agree with Professor Sachin Chaturvedi that if you talk to any of the African ambassadors, they outright tell you they don't want your line of credit. One of the reasons has been that it's a very good effort to allocate money. But if you can't deliver it, what will you do with that money? That remains there. India-Africa Forum Summit, first 3-year summit, first 2 years it took to finalize the plan. Only 1 year left. Then you have the second allotment. Again, you had long time to finalize. The third summit came, by then you had not used even 10% of your money, committed only 40% of the allocated money. You want Africans to be partner and to run it after 3 years. Chinese are there, willing to run it forever. Make it turnkey without any African stake. What you want to do for Africa is not just dependent on what is good for Africa, what is good for you, but also what others are offering to them. So that thing makes things much more complex. But the fact remains that whether Chinese resentment is there or not in Africa, there is enough space for India to effect its engagement with Africa into several areas, and we have long distance to cover in that. We have not done all of that. So I'll stop there.
Unfortunately, this brings us to the end of this very, very interesting webinar, friends, that we've had this afternoon. And I'm sure each one of you will agree with me wholeheartedly, without any hesitation at all, to say that both Professor Sachin Chaturvedi, Professor Ajay Dubey were remarkable in the very candid, forthright manner in which they shared their thoughts with us, in the manner in which they analyzed the issues related to India-Africa ties, COVID, global economy, Africa's economy, and all these challenges that we are encountering today. This will surely not be the only event of this kind that we do on India-Africa. We hope to do one again after a few weeks, after a decent amount of time has passed, and we've had time to absorb these current developments, swamped as we all are with a lot of information and webinars on a daily basis. So please join me in conveying with big smiles on your faces. Since your mics are muted, you can actually smile. And that's a way of thanking both our very eminent speakers today for their very interesting remarks. I personally thank the both of you. Once again, thank you. Be safe. Take care. Goodbye.